There's some big news with the House v. NCAA settlement, and guess what? It's not all bad news for the ACC and Big 12.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. A couple of SEC angles with quarterbacks. Is John Napier ready for the SEC? Does he have everything that he needs? Did Florida make the right choice? That's all on today's show, which is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Yes, indeed. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert. So, story over at On3 by one Pete Nakos discussing the implications that are being actively discussed, proposed, however you want to phrase it, with regards to this House v. NCAA settlement. Now, that is the lawsuit that is not just going to pay a lot of money to athletes who missed out on the chance for financial compensation back in the day for college sports. It's also one that is going to allow for a payroll of sorts for all of the colleges across the country, up to $20.5 million, and that number will go up over time. But there are a lot of decisions that have to get made here, and I want to start with that salary cap, because that cap, and it appears to be a cap, is reportedly going to start at $20.5 million and rise by 4% every year. $820,000 per year is how that will increase after the first season, therefore, after a quick bit of math. Fun fact, when I was prepping for the show, I initially calculated that wrong. I left a zero off $20.5 million and thought it was going up by $100,000, which seemed low. Indeed it was. Anyway, I digress. So, the idea of instituting a cap on what the schools, not NIL collectives, which are separate entities and will remain in place once the House settlement goes into effect, if you can have up to a $20.5 million payroll beginning in 2025, that's going to change the dynamic of finances within major athletic departments across the country in a significant way. But the reason I look at this story as it's developing and say, hey, this could be good news for the Big 12 and the ACC, is you might hear, oh, well, there's just more money coming into the sport and that's going to favor the big dogs. At some level, yes, but they can't run away with it here. This is not Major League Baseball with the Los Angeles Dodgers, who are gaming the system, that they're not violating any rules, but they're not paying Shohei Ohtani any money right now. He's probably the best player in the history of baseball. He's not getting paid anything compared to what he's worth. They're just kicking the can down the road. They got a World Series out of it. Kind of reminds me of when certain sports leagues in college athletics were giving kids money under the table before it was legal to do so above board. And they were doing it because the system allowed for it, and there wasn't, a consistent, there were examples, but there was not a consistent enforcement mechanism out there. And so they took advantage of the situation that has been created. So the idea of rolling out this $20.5 million and saying, hey, there's a cap on what you can or what you can spend as a department, that is better for the competitive balance of college football. Remember, the Big 12 and the ACC are financially behind the Big 10 and SEC. They don't need any more news to put them further behind the eight ball there. That's the first piece of good news. Here's the second one. Reportedly, Deloitte, the accounting firm, could be contracted to evaluate NIL deals over $600. Now, this might face some serious legal challenges, because now what you're discussing is putting a cap on what the athletes are able to earn because of their own name, image, and likeness. Last time, the NCAA was in court debating NIL matters, and they were trying to say, no, they shouldn't be earning this, that. Yeah, they lost, and they got beat pretty badly, shall we say, by legal standards. Quote, Deloitte could, quote, according to Pete Nakos over on 3, Evaluate whether these deals are within a reasonable range of compensation and made with the purpose of using a student athlete's NIL to advance a valid business purpose as outlined in the proposed settlement, end quote. So if you have a $20.5 million cap, not every school is going to be able to get up to that level. But if you can get to $15 million or so, and the high-end schools are only allowed to be at $20.5 million, and there's reportedly going to be an enforcement mechanism there, I'll talk about that in a moment, then you are actually getting towards a more level financial playing field and therefore a more competitive environment. One in which the ACC and Big 12 have a better chance, not saying a great chance or a perfect one, but have a better chance where a legitimate hurdle would be removed from them that they have to jump over to try to build a team that can compete with the best in the SEC or the best in the Big 10. So if those two things go into place, and right now I feel more confident the salary cap coming from the athletic department budget will be there than, the Deloitte and NIL. But again, both are being reported here, and that's how it looks like things are going. Those are significant to me. Those are significant strides for the ACC and Big 12 to level the financial playing field. Yes, those schools are still getting way more in media rights dollars. It's easier for them to max out whatever the contributions are. But if the NIL valuation is suddenly tied to an accounting firm's assessment of, yeah, we don't think you're paying the right amount for, a starting corner, that's kind of a wild premise. And again, I don't know that that would hold up in court. I'm not a lawyer. It just seems kind of sketchy from a legal standpoint to cap what athletes are able to make, because elsewhere, you don't really cap what people are able to make. People go out in the broadcasting world and get whatever contracts they can to do nationally televised games. To my knowledge, there's not a cap on what they can make. There's just a cap on what, a media company is going to pay them to call the games. Now, the other interesting component here is being reported by NACOS, and others have touched on this as well, is that there's a group of 10 athletic directors who are working together from the old Power 5 days when the Pac-12 was a power league, RIP, Sweet Prince. They're looking at an enforcement mechanism because conferences could get more enforcement power. Quote, it gives the conferences more power to come down with enforcement than ever before, shifting away from the NCAA. Another quote is that they're looking to ensure that NIL deals are legitimate and forming an entity to enforce the settlement rules and any violations of the revenue sharing agreement. So that's where I'm curious, to say the least, to see where this all winds up playing out. Because if you are delegating the enforcement of rev share rules, new NIL rules, which I think both can be good for the sport, especially having some more regulations surrounding NIL. If you are doing that, but you leave it to the conferences, you leave them to their own devices to say, you have to be the ones to go and enforce this, boy, that's tough. And the reason it's difficult is because you're asking conferences to essentially help hamstring their own schools. And what do we know? Any conference, understandably so, is going to do. They're going to look out for their own best interest. How do we maximize the dollars we can make? How do we max out what we can get from this situation? So, not sure how that would work. Seems like it could be a collaborative effort, but you've got, a president of Ohio State and Washington in there from the Big 10. You've got Oregon State and Washington State from the Pac-12. You've got Texas A&M. You have a bunch of athletic directors that are on this panel that would work to figure out how they're going to sort through all of these matters. But this is just another significant revelation in the ongoing battle between the Big 10 and SEC and the ACC and the Big 12 that I've talked about many, many times here on the show over the last several months, because it's not just the existential threat that an ACC faces when, Clemson and Florida State want to leave. But when they are existing as they do now, they're fighting a constant battle. And that battle is, hey, we have to figure out how to catch those guys financially. This, to me, appears to have a framework to where they can do that. But hey, does everything always work out in college football the way you'd like to? No, it doesn't. Is it going to work out that way for John Mateer at Oklahoma? Well, I don't know. First, this episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Their all-in-one convenience is what they're all about. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. That's how you get going in the right direction. Some programs might need their own Monarch Money, not just financially, but roster-wise. But luckily, you don't have to live in a world without one, because Monarch Money is here. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. And this episode brought to you by Factor Meals. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto Plus. Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks that keep you fueled all day long. I am a big meal planning sort of guy, which is why Factor is great, because they're doing the meal planning and prep for you. All you have to do is heat and eat. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 off. Use code LockedOnCollege50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnCollege50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box with Factor Meals. John Mateer's got a big challenge ahead of him. So he was at Washington State this past season. In 2023, he was the backup to Cam Ward. You didn't even know who he is. Heck, I barely knew who he is, and I'm a Pac-12 kind of guy. R.I.P. Mateer was a wildcat quarterback that came in some trick play packages in 2023 in Pullman. And then all of a sudden, he gets the keys to the kingdom because Cam Ward goes to Miami, and he absolutely blossoms and does more than I thought he was capable of. I just didn't know that much about him. Most people didn't, but we all know about him now. And here he is, 2 short seasons later, ready to become the starting quarterback for the Oklahoma Sooners in the SEC. That's a pretty rapid progression. And reportedly, he has an NIL deal that over the next 2 seasons, if he stays at Oklahoma, is worth $3 million. So, $1.5 million-ish per year. That's in line with what's been reported before. The high-end quarterback deals, maybe $2 to $3 million a year. But typically, Matt Rule, I think, laid out, or was one of the first coaches to say publicly a while back that, if you want a great quarterback nowadays, $1 to $2 million a year. Thought you might be curious. That was reported over at On3, the $3 million deal. But John Mateer last season bursts onto the scene and now has a significant challenge ahead of him on 2 fronts. But the numbers last year were pretty undeniable. He was my number 1 transfer portal quarterback. There was no other signal caller that was entering the portal that I thought that had a higher ceiling. That's the way that I look at it here. But I'll come back to Cam Ward here in just a moment. Mateer last season at Washington State, 65%, over 3,100 yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 picks. He also ran for 826 yards and 15 touchdowns. That's defining dual threat. There were times Washington State never crafted a significantly impactful running game in the last couple of years. They were an air raid team. Napier was routinely their leading rusher. Now, the challenge that he's going to face is twofold, and let's start with the caliber of competition, because that's a legitimate question to ask. And you need look no further than his predecessor at Washington State. Because Cam Ward began his career at Incarnate Word. That's an FCS school in the Southland Conference. He was there and went to Washington State. And when you watch Ward in his first season, he was kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. But there were a lot of moments that certainly have stuck with him as he gets ready to get taken in the first round of the NFL draft, where he made plays that you watched and went, Cam, you can make that play at Incarnate Word. You can't make that play at Washington State. Is it the same level of jump in competition to go from Washington State to the SEC as the FCS to Pullman in the Pac-12? Probably not. But it's still a jump. There is still a gap. Washington State's schedule last season had Portland State, it's an FCS school. Then their best wins of the year. Remember, Washington State was discussed last season on this show, and maybe lightly on some others, but not as much, as, hey, could they be a college football playoff team? Well, they were starting to have the resume to do it, and then it all fell apart in the second half of the season. It's kind of how Jake Dickert's teams operated in Pullman the last couple of years, unfortunately for the Cougs. But you had Portland State, Texas Tech, you had Washington. All right, everything's going great. San Jose State, they put up 54 points. Defense wasn't doing a lot. They lose at Boise State. Then it's Fresno State, Hawaii, San Diego State, Utah State, New Mexico, Oregon State, Wyoming. Okay, not here to disrespect those programs and what they've done in the Mountain West in the last several years of the Pac-12, depending on which school you're talking about there. But it's going to be a little bit different for the Sooners, who are in their second straight year of wondering how in the world they have their schedule while Texas has theirs in the SEC. Oklahoma plays Michigan week 2. They play Auburn a couple weeks later. They've got Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Bama, and LSU, and Missouri to round out the second half of the season. So this is going to be a significant jump. And Napier has got a lot of talent, immense potential, can absolutely step in and thrive. But this is a question that I'm going to be asking for the Sooners quarterback going into this year. Are you ready to go up against the SEC? And look, I have been one of many people that I know of in this content space that have looked at the SEC in the past year and said, yeah, it's not the big bad wolf that it used to be when I was a kid, because guess what? It's not. It's still a higher level of competition than what you were facing before. So that's the first challenge that John Napier has. Here's the second challenge that John Napier faces going into the season with Oklahoma. There's a lot of turnover for the Sooners, and he's trying to elevate guys who are trying to make that same sort of jump for the most part on the perimeter. So expected to be his top 3 receivers, according to Jay Smith of Locked On Sooners, who I consider an incredibly reliable source. Let's start with Deion Burks, because he got hurt last year, because if you were a wide receiver at Oklahoma in the year 2024, you got hurt. It's just what you did, Mom. All the cool kids were doing it, so I did it too. And they were incredibly decimated by the end of the season. But Deion Burks and John Napier could be the most electric tandem in the entire SEC. If Napier translates well with the Sooners, and he's got his offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle, coming with him from Washington State as well, and if Deion Burks is back healthy, Deion Burks 2 years ago at Purdue averaged 13.4 yards a catch. He missed 7 games this past season for the Sooners. You get him back healthy, that can be a lethal combination. But they're bringing up a couple of guys who they feel are going to be able to make a jump in competition level, because Giovanni Gibson was an FCS All-American second team at Arkansas Pine Bluff this past year. 70 catches, over 1,200 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Well, that's phenomenal production. But routinely, top JUCO players, and he was an FCS guy, slightly different, but, same sort of vibe. Top JUCO players routinely do not even end up having a significant role. Look at Malik Benson, for instance. He was a guy that came from the JUCO ranks where he was an All-American caliber player, And he went to Alabama, couldn't crack the rotation. Went to Florida State, might have been their top target, but they didn't have a great passing offense. He's at Oregon now. We'll see if he works his way into the fold in that receiving core. But it's not always as seamless when you're making that big of a jump forward. That's just one example. I'm sure there are others of success. But this is something that the entire Oklahoma offense is going to have me watching this year. I mean, I was going to be tuned in anyway because I love college football, but I also used to live in this great state of Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's golf course in Norman, really, really cool. But that's not the only reason I was going to be tuned in, because there's also Keontez Lewis, who will probably be in the fold. He was at Southern Illinois this past year, another FCS school. 819 yards. Good season. 2 years ago at Wisconsin, 2022, at Wisconsin, he had 313 yards receiving. He redshirted in 2023. So John Mateer has to work in two brand new receivers who are making a step up in competition just like he is. He's got to figure out the offensive line. He's on a new team now, and he's got to figure out if Deion Burks is going to be healthy throughout the course of the year. Again, I'm not doubting he's got the talent to do it because I'm bullish on John Mateer. He was my top transfer portal quarterback in this past cycle. There is no one who I thought was more valuable to quarterback position that transferred. And yes, I'm including Carson Beck in that world. Carson Beck would probably be number 2, and I think he could absolutely thrive down at Miami. But these are questions, not doubts or even concerns, really. These are just questions that John Mateer and the Sooners have to be able to answer if they want a bounce-back season and they want to navigate the schedule. I mean, what did they do to tick off the SEC? Texas at South Carolina, Ole Miss at Tennessee, at Bama, host Missouri, host LSU. What? Gross. You have to go at Bama and then have a bye, or at Tennessee, have a bye, then at Bama. That's gross. That's majorly gross. I'm staying in the SEC to wrap up today's show, though, because Florida made an interesting decision. And at first, I wasn't sure, but then I thought about it a little bit more. First, this episode brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees, TurboTax.com. So last year during the season, Florida was blown out twice in 3 games on their home field. Miami came in and boat raced them week 1. I picked Florida to win that game, embarrassingly perhaps. I didn't really make that mistake again because 2 weeks later, Texas A&M came in town and beat them soundly. Now, those happen to be good football teams, but Billy Napier should also be able to build a good football team at the University of Florida. I'm supposing that's, or assuming that that's still the expectation down there in Gainesville. Hint, hint, it is. So Florida reportedly didn't want to pay Billy Napier's buyout because they wanted to make sure that they had the money to keep DJ Lagway at Florida. All right. At first I thought, well, was that really the different, like, if quarterbacks are in, the few $1 million range and Billy Napier's buyout would be in the tens of millions of dollars sort of range, was that really a difference maker? Is this just a report? Is somebody blowing smoke? I've pondered all of those things. But what you have to remember about Florida is their schedule. Sorry, I shook the table. I'm just getting so animated and excited today for those watching on YouTube. What you have to remember with Florida is they were maybe the best 8-win team in recent memory in college football. Their schedule was insane. They went 7-5 in the regular season. And by the way, if they'd had DJ Lagway at Texas, why couldn't they have been competitive in that game? Teams far worse than Florida were competitive with Texas last season. And I was someone who, after the Texas A&M game and 2 embarrassments at the Swamp in the first 3 games, said, yeah, Billy Napier needs to go. And you know what? He should be on a hot seat, but not the hottest seat in all of college football this year. Because I don't think you should undersell how impressive last season was. Yes, the schedule is brutal. Yes, when Florida is right, when they are at their peak, they are not a team that fears others on their schedule. They are a team that is feared by others on the schedule. But when you're so far removed from that era of Florida Gators football, you have to deal with what the reality is, which is everyone feels closer together, and Florida's schedule is going to be really, really hard again. But if Billy Napier can win 7 games with DJ Lagway in last year's schedule, if he does that again this season, I'd have a hard time, because with the way the schedules rotate around every couple of years, you should have a far more manageable kind of Missouri style or Texas style schedule where you look at it and go, yeah, you're going to be favored in, 10 of your 12 games this season. But Florida opens LIU, South Florida. All right, they're going to be okay. No Swamp embarrassments there. But then it gets dicey. At Miami, host Texas, at least they got a bye in between. At Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Georgia, at Kentucky, at Ole Miss. By the way, from October 18th to November 15th, there will be 1 home game played for the Gators in Gainesville, because Florida, Georgia, neutral site in Jacksonville, as always, and then they go at Kentucky, at Ole Miss in consecutive weeks. Then they come back home for the last 2 games of the year against Tennessee and Florida State. Now, I look at that schedule and say, okay, LIU, South Florida, Florida State, those are going to be victories. Mississippi State at home, that's probably a win. So why don't we start it with a baseline of 4? You got to find 3. Yes, I think they could lose at Kentucky. You got to find 3 games between Tennessee, Ole Miss, Kentucky, Georgia, Texas A&M, Texas, Miami, LSU. Well, they found more games than I thought they would a year ago. And keeping this pairing together, I think, was the right decision ultimately. So I applaud Florida for whatever the reasoning was for having patience and realizing, hey, maybe Billy Napier is actually in a place where he can take a step forward. Maybe he doesn't ever get Florida back to where they were in the Urban Meyer days. Maybe he doesn't even get them back to where Dan Mullen had them a time or 2. But right now, the Gators are in progress mode. They are just constant. They are football team seeking progress. That's what they are in the dating sense. I think my younger audience will understand the tweet that I was trying to refer to there. But I thought it was interesting that it was put like that in an official piece over at On3. Well, they didn't want to pay the buyout. They wanted to keep DJ Lagway. Well, I don't know that those dollar figures exactly line up, and I don't know if we'll ever hear what those figures actually are, but it might end up working out anyway for the Gators. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.